I would say I'm what you would call an accidental product manager. I sort of came out of academia, joined a startup, and fell into sort of the product manager type role, and was given the product manager title rather than did the educational courses, came to events like this to learn how to be a product manager. And I'd just start off by saying I think like courses and things like this are fantastic, and I wish they were around more when 7 years ago when I was around, to sort of learn more about product management from a group of experts and sort of talk more with the community. I had to do a lot of learning by reading a lot of books and sort of learning myself. So it's delighted to be here and talking to all of you, and really great that Product School could host this. So I'm going to be talking a bit about responsibilities of a research product manager, or a product manager working in the research environment. And I guess one of the main themes I want to try and get across during my presentation is that in research, I don't think there's much difference to being a product manager for a product. The difference is the product is the output of the research, rather than a product that's in the hands of users, where you're learning feedback directly from the users. Instead, you're learning feedback from your peer community in academia and peer review process and those types of things. But I think there's a bit of a dearth of product managers working in research organizations. And I hope to sort of talk more about why I think there should be more product managers working in organizations that are very much focused on research in a more sort of traditional academic sense, rather than just in companies that are focused on end user products. So I guess a little bit more about me and my background. So my background is in physics and astrophysics. I did my undergrad at the University of Leicester, and then went to do a PhD in astrophysics at the Royal Observatory in Edinburgh. There I did computational simulations of the early universe to see if the first stars or galaxies would either instigate or quench further star formation. And it was there that, in hindsight, I wish I had more access to computer science experts, because you had to learn the coding yourself. As a physicist with a physics background, I just learned how to code for my needs, and that sort of slowed down the process of getting a PhD dramatically. And so through that and many other experiences, by the end of my sort of 3.5 years at Edinburgh, I decided that academia wasn't quite right for me. I was being offered postdocs to continue the research that I'd already done for 3.5 years for another 3 years, and I really didn't want to be bucketed and focused in on one niche problem throughout my entire career. And equally, I was working on a problem that was probably not observable ever, but certainly not in my lifetime. And so you'd never be able to truly validate the simulations that I was running. And so I went out and started looking for what are roles where I could have a bit more real-world impact with the skill set I'd gathered during academia. Very luckily for me, I came across a recruitment agency that was currently recruiting for DeepMind, which at the time was a stealth mode startup working on artificial intelligence, hoping to create artificial general intelligence. The company was around 15 people, and I ticked none of the boxes of the job role that I was being applied for, but they took me in for a 45-minute interview that turned into a 3-hour-long session, at the end of which I was offered a role, which was a research analyst at the time. And this is why I don't really associate myself too much with roles or titles, and more with like the actions and the work that you're currently doing. In that, my role there was around trying to find out where machine learning, and in particular deep learning, could have the most impact. And this was back in 2012, just when deep learning was starting to come out in academic forums. And so it was a very exciting time. We were sort of looking at a range of different products, or different areas that we could go for in terms of taking the fundamental research and applying it to real-world data and scenarios. And we ended up on a few different projects, but it was quite funny that we ended up on a project that was around image search, but focused on fashion. So, breaking down, deep learning works really well on images. Therefore, what is the most sort of valuable area that you could have a real-world impact? And the fashion world was at the time very much looking for how can people find the fashion they want online. And so we ended up in this vertical working on this. And my friends always joked to me that I was an astrophysicist PhD that was working at the intersection of fashion and deep learning. And it's just to say that it really doesn't matter what you end up working on. It's the way and the people that you're working with that really has the impact. But when we eventually, in 2014, joined forces with Google, I started again reassessing all the different opportunities where we could apply machine learning, and in particular deep learning and reinforcement learning, into products in Google. Now, the process we generally go through on that, it's the same process we went through for the fashion search, was talking to lots of people, talking to the experts. We must have met with 150, 200 different teams within Google to find out what their problems were, whether they thought machine learning was the solution, did they have the data available, did they have the experimentation pipeline available, and sort of trying to boil down what is the sort of best way for machine learning to have an impact in Google. Fortunately, a number of people had already showcased machine learning working in Google, and so there was some low-hanging fruit for us to work with. But the way that we carry out this opportunity search is very similar to the way that product managers look for the next best feature for their product. The only difference is that this is focused on a research, right? So what is the most interesting research problem that we believe deep learning or machine learning is the best solution to? And equally finding, the best people to work with and the people that are willing to go through experimentation and iteration and things like that. But that search for the right research project to work on is exactly the same as the search for the right feature for a product. And so during that time, I ended up getting to work on a very cool range of projects, including YouTube and Google Play, a wearable device that Verily is now using for healthcare monitoring, and also the self-driving cars. And so I worked on a number of small projects across those different areas, sort of working out how best to work on machine learning problems in Google. And then about 3.5 years ago, we started wondering where outside of Google we could start to apply machine learning. Now, DeepMind's mission is to solve intelligence and then use that to solve everything else. And so we were really looking for where are the impactful, societally stuck problems that we believe that AI and machine learning and deep learning could actually have a real tangible impact. So again, what did we do? We go out and we talk to the people that know the most about that. So in healthcare, we went out and we talked again to 150, 200 different groups, clinicians, academics, providers, everybody that's working in healthcare, and trying to understand what is the problem that they're facing. Do they have enough data for machine learning to be the solution? And is machine learning actually the right solution, or do they just need some statistical methods or some analytics, or just need to collect some more data? And really trying to narrow down where is the best place for deep learning to have a real world impact. And so we ended up working on a product called Streams, which is a mobile application. It's in use in the Royal Free London Hospital, not too far away from our office. And essentially, it's around focusing on acute kidney injury and delivering alerts to clinicians at the right time for the right patients so that they can avoid patients deteriorating without knowing about it. And over time, we then began DeepMind Health Research, which is focusing on what deep learning could resolve working in healthcare. And so we initiated collaborations with Moorfields Eye Hospital, University College London. We have a mammography collaboration with Cancer Research UK and a number of other partners. And we also started working with the Veterans Affairs in the US around trying to predict the onset of acute kidney injury rather than just alerting on patients that are already deteriorating. Now, these were selected out of, as I say, 200 other projects that we could have done. And the key requirement was that deep learning could solve a particular use case that is currently unsolved in that domain, either because human experts are currently the best at doing it and handcrafted methods can't do well, or because there's some useful feature and use case that clinicians can't do well, but machine learning could actually work well in that scenario. And predicting the onset of acute kidney injury is particularly one of those. So taking a step back from the work I do at DeepMind, for this presentation, I wanted to talk more about what I think the responsibilities of a product manager are, and particularly what I think they are for research. I think the responsibilities of a product manager are really well defined for products which have an end user, where you're trying to explore what is the best next feature, what is the user actually using this product for. But in research, it's slightly less well defined. But it can be pretty much boiled down to a single word. It's all about impact. When you're looking at the next feature for a product, when you're looking at should we implement X over Y, you're always looking as product managers for what is the most impact. There are a lot of problems out there that people find very interesting that are just not impactful. And I think our role as product managers is to assess each of those different problems and those interesting, innovative solutions that are being suggested or provided by the CEO or a researcher or somebody else in the organization, and really think about, well, if we solved that, what impact would it have? And that's the same for a feature going into a product as it is for research. The obvious other things that then fall out of that is, well, you need to be ensuring that you're working on a use case or a user story or something specific, right? So you're not just solving a generic problem, but you're solving a specific problem for a specific person. And you're doing that with research as well as thinking about the product and end use. Obviously, product managers are defined by their successes, and their successes are measured by metrics. So even in research, you need to ensure that you have the right use case selected so that you can define your success metric before you start, so that you know when you've reached success. One of the things about research is you can always do more research. If you solve a research question, it just brings up another 10 to 100 research questions. So it's really important that you know what your success and what your metric is for defining success in your research. The standard role of a product manager focused on, it's often talked about as leadership. I like to think about it more as collaboration. Your role is to bring together groups of dispersed people with different expertises. In product world, that is designers and engineers and marketers and UXR. In research, that is bringing together, in healthcare, for example, that's pulling together clinical research scientists that speak a very different language to machine learning research scientists, that speak a very different language to legal or regulatory people. And so your role is around pulling together a collaboration and then driving leadership through that on the use case that you've selected. I think it's very important as a product manager, you're thinking about velocity and what you're delivering, and that always rolls back to the impact and the use case. I often talk to, we have a lot of program managers that work at DeepMind, and I always talk to them about what the differences between our roles are. And I think program managers are very much focused around execution and reducing friction and ensuring that the deliverables are reached on time. But the product manager should always be thinking about the velocity and what actions could be taken to increase that velocity. Not necessarily on just that project, but in general. Like, what are the areas where if you just tweaked this and tweaked that, suddenly there would be an increase of velocity from the team working on the problem. Very importantly, especially in research, is managing uncertainty and complexity. So you need to find the ways to protect your team and your researchers from the complexity or the uncertainty that's happening around them in the organization and beyond, but equally providing them the space. So finding that balance between providing them guidance and giving them space to explore. And that, I think, is a constant balance that you are just juggling every single day. And being able to deal and work in that complexity and uncertainty is absolutely critical. And I think this is actually another really, really important one. I mean, I come from a startup background with DeepMind. I joined when there were 15 people. So as is naturally a tendency in a startup, you need to muck in. But I think as a product manager, you always need to muck in. There is always somebody missing, some expertise missing from the team that you're working with. You need to jump into that hole, fill it, either by carrying out the actions or looking for the right person to do that job. But your role is to make sure that you reach this impact. And the only way to do that is by filling those gaps, mucking in, being willing to jump into the trenches with the team and work with them to deliver success. So no product manager presentation ever is complete without the 3 circles. I noticed it earlier in the presentation, and I'm very pleased that I can provide my own. And I think if I was to define product management for research rather than for features, it's around finding the connection between a specific use case that hasn't been resolved yet, new technologies such as deep learning, reinforcement learning, AI in general, but not just specific to those, and then domain expertise, right? So getting the experts to tell you exactly how it happens, right? In normal product space, the expert is the user, the consumer that's using your application. In this case, it might be the clinician or the energy expert or the regulator or lots of different expertises. But in finding that key intersection of these areas, that's where you find the most impactful research projects. And trust me, there's a whole host of research projects here and here and here and here, but the impactful ones that will deliver something that is real world useful, that's at the intersection. So for healthcare, this is how we helped select the projects that we focused on. We were looking for a specific clinical problem, not just an interesting data set, but a specific clinical problem where machine learning and the medical data that was already available could be used to find a real world use case. And by using this very simple headline saying solve clinical problems using machine learning, we were able to find impactful projects. There were a lot of interesting projects in healthcare using machine learning, and we could have done a whole host of them. But by focusing in on solving a specific clinical problem, which is a very product manager mindset, we were able to find projects which we believe should be able to lead to real world patient benefit and positive outcomes. So our range of projects now focus on referral and diagnosis from OCT eye scans. We look at segmentation of CT scans for head and neck cancer for radiotherapy planning. We work on trying to predict and detect malignancy in cancer from mammograms. We're trying to predict the onset of acute kidney injury days in advance from electronic health records. And we also are trying to improve the existing deep learning and machine learning architectures such that they will work well for future medical problems. So today I'd like to focus a little bit more on the ophthalmology work that we've been doing with Moorfields Eye Hospital. And I'm going to take you through some research slides, but I really want to try and take a product drive on it and sort of explain why I think the product mindset has helped guide this project. Back in 2015, there was a Wired article where the founders of DeepMind, Demis, Moose, and Shane, talked about DeepMind in general and where we wanted to go with it. And as part of that, there was a piece where Mustafa talked about wanting to have a real-world positive impact. We wanted to work on energy and transportation and healthcare. Unfortunately for us, Dr. Pierce Keane, who's a consultant ophthalmologist at Moorfields Eye Hospital, read the article and sent Mustafa a ping to say, I think there's some really interesting problems in ophthalmology using these 3D OCT scans that deep learning could be really well suited for. And so we met with him and chatted, and he's like, an absolutely superb clinician scientist that's got collaboration through his bones. And we were really excited about the opportunity to work with somebody that was so innovative and collaborative and forward thinking. And I'd say this because I think it's really important that if you are working outside of your immediate group, that you really look for those people that are collaborative and willing to go the extra mile. Those are the people that are going to get you the impactful project done. Pierce Keane is definitely one of them. And the sponsorship came from Professor Sir Pencore, who is the Director of Research at Moorfields Eye Hospital. So there is a major issue with eye health, both in the developed but also in the developing world. And due to the aging population, there is a huge increase in the prevalence of eye diseases. And this is estimated to lead to a 3-fold increase in blindness by 2050. However, conversely, on the other side, there is also a stat that says over 80% of all visual impairment could be prevented or cured if caught early. So there is this real mismatch between this increasing prevalence and an opportunity to improve that as long as you can predict or detect or provide access to experts that can predict or detect in time. And so this is one of those classic product problems where there's a real need, there's a real use case, and there's a lot of incentive and desire to resolve this. And thankfully, we worked on the problem with Pierce and with Moorfields for a couple of years. And to cut the long story short, we were delighted to get a Nature Medicine publication and the front page and a lot of positive press around it. And I would sort of point you in the direction of our paper in Nature Medicine. It's open sourced as well on the DeepMind website. And basically, it's focused on showcasing that an algorithm that we've trained and developed in deep collaboration with Moorfields Eye Hospital is able to detect disease and make referrals at the same level as an expert ophthalmologist with 20+ years experience. But the key thing for this group I really want to call out is the first 2 words in the title of the paper, this clinically applicable. So normal research papers in this area have focused on how can you detect different diseases in different eye scans or different medical imaging. Those are really interesting academic problems to ask, and really interesting research has come out from asking those questions. But the real problem isn't detecting the right eye disease. So a patient with age-related macular degeneration who's had it for 30 years, is getting the treatment, is being sought after and resolved by the system, is very different to a patient that has just got age-related macular degeneration. In most research projects, those 2 people would be clustered in the same case. These people have age-related macular degeneration, and they'd be compared against people that don't, the normals, the people that are fine. But what is actually the critical use case is not do they have this disease or not, it's should they be seen by an expert for treatment. And this is why we focus on referral and not just diagnosis. And then we try to ensure that we compare the algorithm against existing best practice for those pathways, so the real world pathways. And this is where we believe we can get the clinically applicable algorithm. So our belief is that by doing this research and doing it in the way that's focused on a specific use case has meant that this algorithm should be more clinically applicable than others currently in academia. So just to take you through that, this is an OCT scan, the dark black and white. It's a 3D scan of the back of the eye. And we try and detect different pathologies and anatomies that are happening in the eye. And we focus on the triage recommendation, where the critical one is obviously you need urgent referral because you have a serious eye condition and you need treatment within the next 48 hours. So an OCT scanner looks like this. A trained expert takes the scan, it does both your eyes. The device costs tens of thousands of pounds, but the price is dropping so much so that the high street is bringing it in, it's making its way to the developing world. And so there's a huge increase in the number of OCT scans that are taking place in the world, but there isn't a huge increase in the number of experts that are trained to read these OCT scans. A classic fundus photography. So this is if you got a special camera, just pointed it in your eye and took a picture. That would be the back of your eye and the retina. The OCT scan is instead an in-depth scan of this section of the eye. It's essentially like an ultrasound, but using light. And it gives you this really detailed, in-depth view, layered. It's got 128 different slices. It's just basically really rich information that you don't get from this 2D scan. And so the device is able to give you much more accurate detection, or at least much more confidence in your detection of pathologies. So the use case that we then focused on was referral suggestion, where we bucketed it in, by talking to expert clinicians, we bucketed it in four areas. Urgent referral, you need treatment within days, otherwise your eyes are going to deteriorate. Semi-urgent, you have some issues, but you're not going to deteriorate over the course of days, you're going to deteriorate over the course of months. Routine, which is, yeah, we have some stuff we want to check up on you, but it's not critical. You're not going to deteriorate very fast, but we want to make sure that it's not changing over time. And then finally, observation only is we've got no real concerns about you. Why don't you come back in a year for your standard eye check? And so what we then tried to do is train a deep learning algorithm to not just detect the diagnosis, but detect whether a patient should have urgent, semi-urgent, routine, or observational referral. So this is the bit where I get to enjoy talking about what the actual scientists came up with and pretend it's some of my own. But as a product manager, and I'm sure most of you in the group will know, we don't do the actual cool bit. We sort of set everything up and then let the experts and the people with the real knowledge actually execute. And so this is where a group of world-class machine learners and clinician scientists got together to discuss how do we resolve the numerous problems that are around applying deep learning to these OCT scans. And the solution they came up with was you take the digital OCT scan, you train a segmentation network that's able to segment different areas of the eye and the different pathologies that are coming on the eye to create what they call this tissue map hypothesis. So this is meant to be resembling the actual tissue pathology in your eye. Instead of being just a sort of type of scan, it's now meant to be resembling what's happening in your eye. And then using this tissue map, you then train a classification network that detects either diagnosis or referral. It takes around 900 manually segmented sparse training images to train the segmentation network. What that means is getting real experts with 20 plus years experience to sit down in front of a screen and pixel by pixel go through labeling what the different areas are. So it's quite sort of intense time, but there's only 877 of them, which in machine learning terms is a very small amount. And then to train the classification network, we used around 15,000 of these tissue maps with confirmed diagnosis and referral decision. Now, the benefits of this two-stage architecture are that we believe that this tissue map hypothesis provides a clinically interpretable representation. Now, anybody working in the deep learning AI area, especially in healthcare, knows that interpretability is a key issue of the black box of the AI. We believe by doing this two-stage architecture, you can see, there's this blood vessels and there's this fluid underneath the eye, and I can see why that's causing this suggestion that this patient has choroidal neovascularization and therefore needs urgent referral. So you can imagine an expert seeing this and then going back to the interpretable map and saying, I can understand why the algorithm picked this because of these features in the map. Secondly, this second stage is completely device independent. There are 3 major manufacturers of OCT devices. There are a long tail of other people, but equally these device manufacturers are bringing out new devices every few years. And so if you're able to make it independent of device, you will never need to retrain this second classification network. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, we reach expert performance, able to perform on par as the world's best ophthalmologists at the world's best eye hospital with 20 plus years experience. So we also train what's called an ensemble, and what this means is instead of just taking one training network, we train 5 different networks and get them to all output the same thing. Now we have 2-stage network, and so we come out with 5 different segmentation hypotheses, and each of these come out with 5 different classification hypotheses. And what this means is that we're able to provide a confidence or a measure of uncertainty as to how sure we are about the prediction. If all of these come out with the same prediction, i.e. this one, then we can say we have a high confidence that this patient has X pathology and needs Y referral. If they were all roughly the same, we would say, well, we predict this, but we're not very certain about it. And so again, this plays to that interpretability key aspect in healthcare. And finally, and if you take one thing away from today, this I hope is it, is that for healthcare, the key issue is what is the ground truth? And most cases, the ground truth is what the clinician provided at that time when they saw the patient. And as we all know, clinicians do sometimes occasionally get it wrong. There's a lot of stress and tension and resource deficiencies in a number of the different healthcare systems, and we can't assume that humans will be infallible in these types of scenarios. And so instead of using what they gave at the time of referral, we get the clinical team at Moorfields to go back in time to find patients that had a scan 1-2 years ago, and then assess their whole clinical pathway for that year to 2 years afterwards and say what should have been the referral for that patient at that time of entry. And that means that, maybe the decision was wrong at that time, but maybe it wasn't. But you can see all the different treatment decisions, all the different items, and be able to provide what we think is probably the best ground truth that you could provide for that OCT scan. And by training a network on that data and then evaluating both the network and also the experts against that ground truth, we were able to get a comparison of how well the algorithm works against current clinical experts. So using this, we developed an algorithm. We tested it on 1,000 scans that had this perfect ground truth, as good as you can get. And we plot it on what's called a receiver operating characteristic curve. And this is focused on just the urgent referral. I'm not going to go into detail on the graph and what's important, but the key aspect is that you want to get to this top left. If you can get to the very top left of this curve, you are perfect. You capture every case, you never get a false positive, and you're doing awesome. And what this is a zoom in on this yellow area here. So as you can see, the algorithm is getting pretty close to perfect. It's making very few errors on the number of cases that it's looking at. And the star represents what we think is optimal performance, right? So you're catching the most number of diseases with the minimal number of false positives. The benefit of having this ground truth data set is that we can then test the clinicians against what this ground truth is. So we got 8 experts to sit down in a room and provided them these 1,000 cases each and got them to say, what would you say if you saw this patient with this OCT scan? And we could then compare that to what actually happened to that patient in the future. And this is how the experts did. So as you can see, the experts range from 3 years of experience up to 20 plus years experience. And the sort of grayed out area is the statistically significant area. So as you can see, the blue line sort of shows that we are performing above what even the best expert can do in this scenario. But what we can actually claim is that statistically, we are significantly on par with these 2 experts and significantly better than these others. However, for the claim of clinically applicable and with a product mindset, this is a false claim to make for real clinical practice, because we are providing the experts with exactly what the algorithm got, which is just the OCT scan. But in real clinical practice, the clinician also gets an OCT scan, a fundus scan, and patient information. And so we wanted to simulate as close as possible what a real clinician sees in real practice. So we gave the clinicians this additional information, and we ran the experiment again. So here again is with just OCT. And this is how they perform when they have more information. Thankfully, most of them improve. So that's good news for you if you're heading into Moorfields Eye Hospital anytime soon for a checkup. However, what you can also see is that while a couple of them are just above the curve, they're all within this gray area, which means we can still say that compared to real clinical practice, our algorithms are statistically significantly on par with the world's best experts at one of the world's best eye hospitals. And so this is really quite an incredible breakthrough. Now that's just focused on urgent referral. So this is just for the patient. That was just for the patients that needed treatment right now. But you also want to make sure that you're doing the right thing for all the other patients, right? There's a lot more of the other patients. And so to best assess that, we looked at what's the error rate overall. And the error rate overall for the algorithm against these 1,000 scans was 5.5%. And this is how the experts did. So again, we can say that our algorithm is on par with the best experts. And again, this is just with OCT scans. And so if you then add the clinicians and you give them additional information, thankfully, again, they improve and their error rates drop down. But again, they are all roughly on par with the algorithm. And so we also wanted to prove that, in a scientifically rigorous way, our claim that the second part of the network is device independent. So these are some examples of two different devices. The one on the top is a TopCan device. The one on the bottom is a Heidelberg. And you don't need to go into too much detail on this, but they're meant to be showing the same pathologies. And as you can see, the images look quite different. And so if you were to train a machine learning algorithm to detect this on just the top ones and then show them the bottom ones, it would be quite confused because it's never seen anything quite like this before. So to prove our point, we did just that. So we took the new device that the algorithm had never seen, and we applied the original segmentation network to this scan, and what you get is crap out. And so the model doesn't do well. It hasn't generalized to this new device because it's never seen an image quite like that device. It's getting rough areas right. It knows that this middle bit should be greenish and this bottom bit should be grayish, but it's really mucking up on the key pathology areas. And then we, just to prove our point, applied the original classification network, and you get results that are essentially random, as good as random. But the key aspect is what this shows is that using this tissue map hypothesis, all of you are visually able to see that the algorithm isn't working. If we just looked at the output, we wouldn't even see this. If we just looked at the output, we wouldn't know from an end-to-end network that the output was wrong. We would just get a referral decision saying urgent. But because you also get this tissue map, you're able to see that the algorithm just hasn't done well on this case. So we then retrained just the segmentation network. And you'll remember that we trained it initially on 877 slices. This time we retrained it with only an additional 152. Again, sparsely segmented, getting an expert in a dark room to sort of label up the key pixel areas. But we only needed 152 of these additional OCT scans. And this gave us segmentations, again, that were at expert performance, that made a lot of sense. And so showed that the algorithm was able to generalize to this new device type with just a few number of additional training scans. And then using the original classification network, it then reached the same expert performance. And now what this means is that you need no additional diagnosis labels. So from a product sense, it means that when a new device comes on the market, you no longer need to wait for that device to be used on 10,000 patients, for them patients to then wait 12 months to see what the referral decision should have been using the proper ground truth. Instead, you just get 152 patients, segment them up, provide the tissue map hypothesis, and then you can use the pre-trained algorithm. So anytime a new OCD device comes on the market, anytime something changes in the process, all you need to do is rescan this first one. So as a product feature, this research is absolutely critical for sustaining future products. So that's ophthalmology. And what I wanted to say is that we follow through the same sort of mentality for all of our projects, which is, what is the use case that we're actually optimizing for? What is the metric of success for that use case? And how do we ensure that the research has the features that are required to make it clinically applicable? So in radiotherapy, we work with University College London Hospital and Professor Ricky Sharma. Again, very collaborative, incredible researcher that just wants to make interesting research happen and have a real-world impact. And again, same types of problems. So over 500,000 people are diagnosed with head and neck cancer every single year. But this radiotherapy planning process can take up to 4 hours per patient. These are clinicians that are working across a range of different tasks. They could get halfway through this planning process and then get pulled off to deal with something urgent. It can take a few days to get the time to do this. And the more time between diagnosis and treatment for any patient with cancer increases their likelihood of a bad outcome. And so there's a real product need for something that speeds up this process of segmentation. And so what we wanted to focus on is segmenting the organs at risk. So for the head and neck, there are roughly 21 organs at risk. That includes the eyeballs, the connections between the eyes and the brain, your brain stem and your parotoids and your brain and your mouth, and these key areas. Now, what normally happens is a well-trained clinician sits down for 4 hours and goes through each one of these slices and labels the key areas around the tumorous region. What we wanted to do is train an algorithm to do this itself immediately to the same level. So as is usually the case in machine learning, you need to get a very good data set. And so we labeled up a very large, very well defined data set, where our focus was, how can we get to the right number of labels per organ to get expert performance? And so the numbers here sort of show roughly how complicated that area is to segment. The more there is, the harder it is to segment to human performance. And again, we needed to evaluate that human performance. And so what is the gold standard? The gold standard is somebody with expert performance labels it, an oncologist reviews it, they relabel, they review, they relabel, they review. And this is what happens in clinical practice. It's very time intensive, but it produces a gold standard, a ground truth. And what we wanted to do is basically compare, what if you just did it with an algorithm, which is this segmentation by the UNet, versus what if just a human did it, right? And so our comparison is this versus this versus this versus this. What we found is that our methodology is on par with expert performance. And so what you see on the right-hand side is the UNet, the model that we use to segment these scans. And what you see in the middle is a human doing the same thing. And you can see they're virtually indistinguishable. If you measure different metrics for it, you can say that they're within expert performance. And that's what we did. And we showcase that for 21 organs at risk, we reach expert performance on 19 of them. And we submitted these results to arXiv and presented them at a conference. And we're hoping to improve the last two organs before we then go for a full peer-reviewed paper. But the key here is that, again, what actually matters is, are you getting the same performance per patient? And if you look per patient, so that's segmentation across all of these 21 organs, you reach the same performance as experts in each of these for every patient. We also look at fundamental research. So this is a paper that's gone to the NIPS conference, which is a large AI conference, happens every year. It's in December this year, so it's coming up soon. And we focus on, can we develop better architectures to work well in healthcare? But the key is, what is the use case and problem that this is solving? And the actual problem is that when you have a cancer, so for example, in these examples, this is tumorous regions within CT scans of the lung, experts provide different results, right? So what's the ground truth when experts disagree with each other? And actually, experts disagree with themselves numerous times as well. And so how do you deal with the ambiguity of exactly what the boundary is when you're trying to develop an algorithm that's as good as an expert? And a potential answer is, instead of providing a single segmentation scan, you provide multiple, right? So this segmentation output is from a model that's able to provide probabilistically what it thinks are numerous different types of the right type of segmentation. And so this is another case of a product need or an interesting problem in the medical space driving real-world research in quite a fundamental way. And so what you can see is that you can imagine a world where you provide a product that provides multiple different segmentations, and the clinician chooses which one they think best represents this case. And you can see that different clinicians would pick different examples, and that some clinicians think it is tumor and some don't. And so the algorithm also says, no, this is a tumor, and sometimes it says, no, it isn't. And so that ambiguity that's in the process and in the device that's getting the scan is able to be dealt with in the model itself. And the results, I won't go into detail on this, but the results are that this model performs much better across a range of different problems. You can see the paper if you want to, by being probabilistic rather than deterministic. I'm not going to go into detail on these, but essentially we're working on trying to detect malignancy in mammograms. A huge number of papers and other teams are trying to do the same problem. And we're again approaching it with what we feel is a more distinct approach around defining what is a specific use case, how is it decided, What is the problems that the radiologist faces when trying to make these decisions? Can you provide features based on the network to help the radiologist make the decision? And unfortunately, I don't have much to show on this, but this is currently in the research mode, so watch this space. You never know how long research is going to take, so I'm not going to make an estimation of when it's out. But keep an eye out for there's very promising results coming up in this project. And finally, again, we're working on detecting deterioration from EHR records with the Veterans Affairs. We always collaborate with a range of experts that are professors, been in their area for years. And again, I'm not going to go into too much detail on this, but there's some really promising results coming out of the early stage research on this. And we're excited to be able to publish those and sort of disseminate them, but also look at how they might be applied within the products that are being built across healthcare at the moment and in Google. So that was a range of the projects that I work on, the way I try and think about how I'm adding value to those projects, the sort of product mindset that we try to instill even in the research projects. And I wanted to just go into little detail around how I try and think about other values that I can bring to those projects, not just in terms of thinking about the use case, but also thinking about collaboration and velocity and uncertainty and things like that. And this is just some of the learnings that I've come across in the time, this sort of last 7 years in DeepMind and 3 years working on healthcare, just to share some of those. And I think basically, I sometimes envy some of the work that is outside of research, because if you spend enough time, you can estimate the right number of time, provide a little cushion, and you can get a reasonably good estimate of, is this going to take a month, or is this going to take 6 months, or is this going to take a year? In research, you don't really have that. You have no idea whether the first methodology is going to work or whether you're going to end up with absolutely no results at all. And so to deal with that, we try and split up the full project into different sections. And the first of which is initiation. And that is around looking for the right problem, signing the right deal with the right partner, with the right expertise, with the right data, and really diving into what the specific use case is. Now, a lot of that can be estimated and time-boxed, and essentially can be driven by very traditional product management methods like Agile or Waterfall or other different methodologies, but essentially it can be done using a time-box method. And the same can be said about the experimentation setup. So defining what experiments you want to run, creating the infrastructure and the libraries and the architectures you want to use, defining the criteria and the metrics that you want to use for it. Again, can be reasonably well time-boxed in a very specific way and run as quite a sort of sprint-based type product management method. What can't be done is research. You have no idea how long the research is going to take, whether the first method is going to be world-class or whether it's going to be the 715th method that you use. And so how do you deal with this type of issue? The research, the key is it needs to be iterative. It needs to be allowed space, allowed availability of time and energy to enable the researchers to go through the process that they would in academia. And so your role as a product manager in this research space is to advocate for the team to get as much time and energy and space as they can, protect them from the desires of stakeholders that want a result, want it now, we need to publish, and speed up their ability to iterate quickly on their experiments. And once they eventually, and in my case, I'm very lucky, I work with an extremely talented team that seem to always get results given enough time. When they do deliver that, then it's time to work out how you're going to disseminate that. In DeepMind, we love to do peer review publications. That's great for academia. It's great for scientific validity. It's great to get feedback and get solidity in your views, and also to hear feedback on where you didn't do so well and what things you need to improve. And then obviously then move on to all the work that actually goes into traditional product management around building an application around that research. And that, again, can all be time boxed in a certain way. And this slide is all just trying to say that, any type of sprints or waterfall or Kanban or any of these types of methodologies, researchers just kick back at you on it, because you cannot explore the research in the right space with those methodologies. What you instead need to do is provide them short time frame windows where they can explore as much as they like in some defined way. And so the way we do that is, allow people to do 2 weeks researching a particular question or a particular data set or a particular problem. And then at the end of the 2 weeks, as a group, as a scientific group, sit down, evaluate the results, decide if they're sort of suggesting the right type of results or heading in the right direction, and then decide whether you're willing to spend another 2 weeks of resource allowing them to explore that further, or whether there's another problem that needs 2 weeks to work on that's more valuable, more impactful, more useful for the end. And one of the things that researchers love doing is exploring as much as physically possible. So this time boxing of this exploration and having this scientific discussion is a way of providing some guidance, stability, and drive towards an end result, the impact that as you as a product manager really want and need, while allowing the researchers the space to explore interesting research questions. And the key for you as a product manager is what's the velocity and what's the things that you can do to improve that team's velocity and improve that team's ability to execute. And I would say it boils down to very few things, really. And in a machine learning world, in an AI problem space, it boils down to how can you get the highest quality of data for a very specific use case and get that labeled really quickly, really efficiently, and ensure you're getting the right label for the right use case. Right? So a lot of times you dive into a problem, you think, right, we need to get a label. And initially with this OCT work, we thought, right, we need to get the diagnosis label. So we need to get as many of them labeled with diagnosis as possible. But that wasn't the right solution. The right solution was, what is the referral decision for these projects, right? So if you can define the right use case, you can collect the right label. That speeds up your process. Finally, luckily I work for a large organization that has a lot of access to this, but the availability of compute resource and tools and libraries, the more that you can provide, the stability, the sort of environment, the compute resource, the faster those experiments run, the faster you get initial results, the faster you can analyze that and iterate. And the key for research is allowing those researchers to iterate quickly on experiments. In academia, generally, experiments can take a few weeks to run. In Google, by bringing that down to a few hours, you can make weeks worth of progress in just a few days. Ability to evaluate results and the quality of the analysis. So you also need to ensure that the team are not just jumping onto the next experiment, but are instead doing a full evaluation of the results, that you give them time to do a quality evaluation of those results and pull out the interesting key questions. The research is iterative for a reason. It's iterative because it provides a lot more questions that you really want to dive into and answer. And so if your analysis quality is high, then you can make sure the next iteration is the most valuable thing that you could be doing. If your analysis is poor, then it could mean that you spend another 2 weeks, another 4 weeks, another 6 weeks looking into a problem that is not necessarily the most impactful for the use case that you're focused on. And again, all of this boils down to enabling the researchers to iterate on their ideas, on the issues that they find, and on algorithmic exploration for machine learning. But this really does work in all forms. I'm focused on AI, but this works on all forms of research. Researchers always have new ideas. And so enabling them some space to iterate on those ideas is really important. And then finally, the larger the team you have, the more ideas and experiments you can run, the greater their ability, the sort of better the exploration. And finally, collaboration is absolutely critical. So clinicians talk a very different language to machine learners. If you can find the terminology that allows them to connect at the same level, you will reach your results much, much quicker. And that works in all domains and is very traditional product management talk, which is get your team talking the same language. And if you notice in a meeting that they think they're talking the same language and you believe they're not, definitely make a second meeting to make sure that they're talking the same language, because otherwise you can waste weeks thinking that they're working on the right problem. When they come back to show the results, you realize that there's a difference of opinion. So based on that, so I hope that there was some useful learnings for you there. I'm glad I got the opportunity to talk further about some of the research projects which I've been really privileged and honored to work on with a range of real-world experts. I hope I gave you some information around what my journey was like into product management, certainly more role-focused than title-focused. So I would say that to the rest of you. Everyone can act as a product manager. You don't need a product manager title. So thank you very much for your time.